Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 142 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me, and tonight it's a Big Ten All Conference team unveiling. That would be our All Conference teams and the Big Ten tournament preview in Chicago. We are recording this Monday night. It will get started tomorrow in Chicago on Tuesday. Joe, we're going to start this off with the all conference teams. We're going to start off with the third team. A lot of players got votes. We did it with a couple of other creators. We even shared it in some other places, and we got over 30 ballots. But the third team is headlined by John Blackwell, Hans Steinbach, Donovan Dent, Tyler Bilodeau, Cade Tyson, Renk Mast, and Kylan Boswell. Now, obviously, a lot of the talking points here are going to come with, the second and first team, but anything that surprised you here?
No, I think, the big thing to point out is Kylan Boswell might find himself higher on a first or second team, perhaps, if he doesn't get hurt. I know a lot of people raise their eyebrows at John Blackwell and maybe even Tyler Bilodeau, but I think those are still two very good players. I think they're just way better, not way better. I think their positions are extremely stacked in this conference is the issue.
And Boswell was actually tied for that last spot, and I did give him a tiebreaker over Tariq Francis from Rutgers. But yeah, a lot of good players in this conference, which is why we did go to 7 for the teams. The actual teams in some conferences have 5, and then the Big 12 today just released, their team, which I think had 10 players on it. So we're going to go somewhere in between with 7. Now for the second team, Joe, we've got Lamar Wilkerson, Bruce Thornton, Adai Mara, Merez Johnson, Nick Martinelli, Jackson Kohler, and Trey Kaufman-Renn. Now, the obvious talking point here is that Bruce Thornton's on the second team. I was pretty surprised with this, too. I put him on the first team of my ballot. But once again, a lot of quality players here.
Yeah, I'm the same thing with Bruce Thornton. You look at his last month of track work, and you think even that
Yeah.
in and of itself, even if he was injured, which of course he wasn't, the first 2 to 3 months of conference play should be enough to get you on the first team. But the other thing is Nick Martinelli with a better supporting cast, he probably puts up even better numbers and more efficiency. And probably the headline of this team for me is TKR. A lot of people projected him first team most of the year. I think not necessarily him individually, but a lot of what's been placed on Purdue has kind of fallen onto him, unfortunately, and kind of their perception,
And
fair or not, just as a voter,
ba-
kind of got him to this list.
and ballots for him, Joe, are all over the place. I think he had all three votes for all three teams, and he did also have no, like, somebody left him off completely. So all over the place with TKR. And I just think from a practical point of view, it's hard to put two players from the seventh place team on the first team. And then you have your score. Nick Martinelli scored too much not to be higher than this. And then, I think Mara could have been first team with his defense. And then Thornton, of course. We did open up the voting about a week ago. So the Penn State and Indiana games may have not been taken into account for some people who left Thornton off their first team. But Wilkerson was very close to that last spot on the first team, just a couple of points. And it was pretty simple what we did. First team is 3 points, second team is 2 points, third team is 1, and we added them all up, and this is what we got. All right, now, Joe, here's time for the first team. We have got Yaxel Lindenborg, Keaton Wagler, Braden Smith, Bennett Sturts, Jeremy Fears Jr., Price Santfort, and Nick Boyd. I think you're going to see the first 5 names in a lot of places, and Boyd too, but Santfort over Thornton is what I was most surprised with.
Yeah, I think that's, to be honest with you, Sean, Price Sanford's a hell of a player. I think that's a lot of team bias there, to be honest. I think most people in the country consistently would say Nebraska has a way better supporting cast for Price Sanford, their star, than Bruce Thornton has had at Ohio State. So I think there's a little bias there. Not to take anything away from Sanford, he is one heck of a player and has been the best player on, I think, the most one of the more surprising teams in the country. So it's definitely a compliment to him.
And I'm bringing up the stats right now, Joe. It actually wasn't particularly close between Sanford and Wilkerson. Boyd had the same amount of points as Lamar Wilkerson, but he had another first team vote, so that is why we gave him the tiebreaker. But yeah, 3 points clear of Nick Boyd was Price Sanford, so it's pretty clear that those were the top six, and Boyd and Wilkerson were tied for seventh, and then Thornton was just 1 point behind them. So really, really close. And I was a little bit surprised to see Braden Smith so high. This is the order of how the points went, if you're wondering. Braden Smith was third in points. So clearly, a lot of people still put him on the first team despite him underachieving from his preseason Player of the Year status. But, this was a fun exercise. We're going to hope to do this in years in the future. And then this actual post will be going out with all of the other accounts when we're done here. But Joe, those are the teams, and now we're going to get into the specific awards. There was two coaches that stood out in terms of votes. Tom Izzo got one vote, and then every other vote went to these two. Fred Hoiberg got the slight nod as our Big Ten Coach of the Year. I think if you look at the preseason poll, Joe, it's probably a pretty easy question. Nebraska picked 14th in the preseason. They finished second. Not only did we think Nebraska was going to have a tough time making the tournament, but they are poised for a protected seed. So Fred Hoiberg, pretty deserving to get this Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I think it's without question the most deserving. I'm shocked at Notre Dame, and I know a lot of people look at like luster value. I would have put a vote toward Nico Medved as well. I think getting that Minnesota team to 11th place. And then more recently, Jake Diebler. I know a lot of people projected Ohio State's roster to make the tournament, but I'll tell you, that guy had the most pressure in the conference in terms of job security had he not made the tournament. So I think those are two honorable mentions if we were going to throw two others aside from May and Izzo, who were atop the standings. At least their teams were.
And really, if you look back at that preseason poll, Joe, and I don't have it, it would have been good to have, but really only two teams finished more than a few spots from their preseason rank. It was Oregon, who was picked fifth, and they finished near the bottom, and Nebraska picked 14th and finished second. But other than that, it was a really good job by the coaches coming into the year. I don't remember a preseason poll that looked that accurate, and it does go back to the fact, Joe, that how much of how your season goes matters on what happens in the offseason. I think the preseason poll shows that definitely more than half of what you can do is dependent on your roster. So that is something that we'll look into. I don't remember exactly if we did power rankings to start the year, Joe. I'd have to go and look back. I don't believe we did because we were sort of in the midst of football there. But we've got one more award, and it is the Player of the Year. We did have a tie at the top, two players, unanimous first team, and that would be Keaton Wagler from Illinois and Yaxel Lendenborg from Michigan. We did another poll to be the tiebreaker, and it is Yaxel Lendenborg from Michigan who wins our award. He won the midseason award that we did, and then fell off a little bit in his stats, really, not the team. And then he really has played some great ball down the stretch here, which took him over the top. But Joe, I think it might be as simple as the best player on the best team probably deserves the Player of the Year in a league with a ton of good players.
I agree, Sean. And, Keaton Wagler, I think in a lot of the bigger games this year, he struggled like
He
against
he
Michigan
has hit a
State.
little bit of a wall.
Yeah. And not that 3 games should necessarily degrade from the whole body of work. But when it comes to being the best player in one of the best conferences, you're going to be judged on your biggest game. Yaxel certainly had plenty of stinkers, but they were against teams where the profile wasn't that great, where he kind of could have taken the night off. Against Michigan State both times over 26 points. Comes up big against Illinois, fills the stat sheet, fills the stat sheet against Purdue. I think that was a pretty easy tiebreaker, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a Michigan fan, but
It wasn't
I
particularly close. It was about two
yeah,
thirds of a
yeah.
simple because we
But I
didn't.
think a lot of people do agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't bel I don't believe the actual Big Ten awards are out yet, Joe. If they are, it's been recent, um, because I haven't seen them yet. But we did this. It was fun. It got some great engagement with some of our other people that we do some posts with. So, um, you know, thanks everybody for voting who did. I posted it a few places. This one did get the most because we have built a little bit of a Big Ten audience here. But so thank you all for participating in that. And now, Joe, it's time for the Big Ten tournament preview. We did do a show Saturday night, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here on what happened in this weekend. We did have a Sunday game between Michigan and Michigan State. Joe, that didn't mean a whole lot in terms of seeding for the Big Ten tournament. It did mean that the door is probably closed on the Spartans for that last number one seed in the NCAA tournament. But do you have anything to add on that game before we get into the bracket?
No, and as we get into the bracket, I'm going to reference the result of that game because I actually think it helps the Spartans a little bit.
And I actually thought it was a pretty decent game from the Spartans. And I thought Michigan's bench really stepped up. I think that was the main takeaway in a bench that has become shorter with a key, maybe the most important player off the bench, no longer there. It was big. You get 20-something points off the bench. You have key players making big plays like McKinney and then Roddy Gale getting in there at the end. Like, those two are going to have to play. They're the second and third guard right now, so they're going to have to play well for Michigan. And then, Joe, I don't know if this is confirmed, but it looks like LJ Kaysen is going to be redshirting next year. That makes a lot of sense with the torn ACL, even if it is not bad. And he's still looking at a late January start.
Right.
In the day and age when you can use a year and come back in a couple of years as full strength, it seems like that might be the right idea for Michigan.
I completely agree, Sean. And the way I look at it is you're adding another recruit to the 2027 class. But in terms of this year, unfortunately for LJ Casey, aside from supporting his team in March, I think the book is completely closed. So now kind of the excuse monologue from Michigan fans, especially after the performance they put against a team that's likely to be a two seed. Uh, Frankly, as a Michigan fan, I don't want to hear it.
So now we have the bracket, Joe. The way that it has turned out is this. We start tomorrow and Tuesday with 2 games and then 3 straight days of 4 games. In terms of bubble talk, I think really my team is the only one that has anything to play for in that regard. The Buckeyes are pretty clearly out of the first 4 right now. And I think as long as Iowa doesn't lose, as long as Maryland or Oregon don't beat Iowa and then Ohio State, I don't think Ohio State can drop that far down there. But in terms of the Buckeyes, they're playing, incredible ball coming into this, probably as good as they've ever played against or under Jake Diebler, maybe after that initial bump when they beat Purdue in his first game as interim. But they did sort of get embarrassed by Iowa not that long ago. It's a good opportunity to sort of flush that one down the toilet if it comes up.
I do agree, Sean. And it's funny, if you look at the current betting odds and maybe they shifted a little, Iowa is favored to win the tournament plus 6,000, Ohio State plus 8,000. That's telling me Vegas is loving Iowa to repeat that performance, at least the result of that performance against the Buckeyes. I think the biggest thing here, Sean, is that Iowa game came right as Ohio State was surging. They had just gotten John Mobley back from injury.
That may have been their last loss, Joe, I think.
Yeah, that was their last loss. And clearly Carver Hawkeye is going to be way different. I know United Center will fill up Friday through Sunday. I don't necessarily think Thursday at 11 a.m. is going to be the most amped environment. So interesting to see how Ohio State, with an extra day rest, presumably playing Iowa, will do in that game. I think that's actually could be the best game of that day.
Yeah, I think that maybe if there was like a big brand in the second game that day, that some people would trickle in there and make some noise. But yeah, I don't know what I mean, USC and Washington is going to be the game after them. I can't imagine either of those teams bring a whole lot of fans. And it really does, lend to the fact that they wouldn't do these games if they didn't have to. I don't know if you saw this, Joe, but in the ACC bracket, they actually flipped it so that the 1 and the 4 seed, which is Duke and North Carolina, are playing in the evening slate, and the 2 and the 3 are up top. That was on purpose, very clearly.
Yeah,
and it did work out well for them here. That I think Indiana, Purdue, Michigan State, all in the afternoon, but Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan are in the afternoon slate. So after the first day, obviously, I think Indiana has to absolutely win at least one to not be completely thrown out of the picture. And And then if we can get to Thursday, Joe, obviously we don't know all the games there, but we've got, we're going to have at least one tournament team playing in every game, maybe two. Um, Once we get to Thursday, I think that might be the last chance, really, for these teams to make an impression on the committee. So, maybe I don't think a whole lot probably matters after Thursday, to be honest, but that is probably going to be the most consequential day in the tournament.
I agree, especially for Indiana. I think a lot of people might call out that Purdue's a bad matchup, but I actually beg to differ, not in terms of the matchup, in terms of what's on the line. I think if Indiana wins that game, they really catch the selection committee's attention. I think Purdue is one of the colder, better teams in the country. Regardless, they're still looked at pretty favorably by a lot of bracketologists and by the committee themselves. So I think Indiana winning that, getting two of three from the Boilermakers at that, and getting a huge quad one win, perhaps that propels them over the bubble shot, depending on bid stealers and whatnot, which we know nothing about right now.
Yeah, we'd have to see about the basically WAB is the thing that was most important last year, and it appears to be important this year. Indiana's actually in a pretty good spot already with that number. If they're able to pick up two wins, that might be a number that is too good to leave out. If they were to beat, let's say, beat Northwestern and lose to Purdue, that number would probably stay the same. And the conversation right now, Joe, is that there's 7 teams for 3 spots. And Indiana could probably be the third team, but they don't really have anything that sticks out. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. But if that becomes 2 spots or even 1 spot, you've got to have something that sticks out to the committee, and Indiana doesn't really have that. Another win against, even another quad 2 win would go a little bit, which Northwestern would be, and they're able to sort of get the monkey off their back from their bad loss to them just a few weeks ago. And then we'd have to see where things are at on Thursday, because there are a whole lot of teams that came closer to the bubble rather than the other way around. Really, Ohio State is the only one. Yeah, TCU probably a week and a half ago pushed themselves off it. Ohio State did that, and basically of the 11 other bubble teams, every single one of them lost. So I really don't know how this tournament is going to, feature. It's probably going to be easier for me to pick the field of 68 if there is a bid stealer or two, because there is a big mess down there at the end of the at-larges. But after Thursday, Joe, I think in terms of Michigan's side of the bracket, I think the team that caused them the most trouble is clearly on there, and then Illinois, who might be the only team that could meet them size-wise. I think this is about as bad of a draw as you can get as the best team in the league by far. Playing a team that's playing great right now in Ohio State, potentially, and then in the semifinals, what many people think to be the second best team, and then the team that beat you, the one team that beat you. So, I think Michigan's going to have to play well to continue their dominance here.
Yeah, and I don't really understand why people think, oh, it's it's the Michigan Invitational. Maybe you could say it's because Michigan State's also there, which we'll get to their side of the bracket later. I'm a little worried about Iowa too, because Iowa probably gave Michigan one of their tougher road games. I mean,
Not
the
that
real
long
toughest
ago
road
either,
game.
yeah.
Yeah, because the Penn State game, I know Michigan almost it came down to the last shot, but that was an injured Axel Lendenborg. And let's face it, that was Michigan in their little slump, which of course Wisconsin uh, accentuated. But getting back to that shot, I think Ohio State matchup wise is not necessarily Michigan is
Yeah,
probably the worst matchup for the Buckeyes.
I think
So
they're
I
they're a,
think
le- a
Bruce
less
Thornton would
good
have to go.
version of Michigan. They are pretty
Yeah.
physical and they are kind of long, but not to anywhere close to what Michigan can do. The only way that you can really see it is that you know Ohio State does have 2 guards who could both go for 20, and that
Mhm.
seems to be the formula. Well, that was the formula for one of the 2 teams that beat Michigan. So yeah, I think that this is. I think Michigan will probably win this. And in terms of their odds, Joe, I think they're about minus 150 last time I checked. It's nowhere
105
near
actually.
105. Okay, so nowhere near some of the figures that we're seeing in these other conferences. And, Duke is missing 2 starters. They're minus 300 to win the ACC tournament. And Florida's minus 150 to win the SEC. Those are more of that team's invitational than the Michigan invitational here. Now, I think I'm still going to pick the Wolverines to win, but they're going to have to earn it. That is for sure. Just to even get to Sunday, I think. Because some of their toughest matchups are probably going to be early on.
1000%. And Ohio State is probably the hottest team in the Big Ten right now, to be completely honest with you.
And in this, let's look at this second, you know, of the four here. Potential Wisconsin versus Illinois quarterfinal. Not that long ago, we did see Wisconsin go into Champaign and win there. I don't know if Wisconsin's style of play is the most conducive to like a Big Ten tournament run. They are a little bit inconsistent, where I think they could beat Illinois and then lose by 35 the next day. But are you hoping that we see a rematch between the Badgers and the Illini?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's hoping for. I think, USC, for those who don't remember, did end up winning at the Kohl Center, but that was a completely different USC team. I'm going to be honest with you, Sean. I'm going to be a little surprised if USC gets past Danny Sprinkle in Washington. I think Wisconsin, if you remember last weekend, thoroughly dismantled Washington. Nick Boyd and John Blackwell made quick work of them. I do believe Nolan Winter will be fully healthy for Wisconsin this tournament as well. So, one other thing to pay attention to. Yeah, I have very little doubts that Wisconsin gets to Friday at least. And in terms of that matchup, that's that day, like the middle matchups to me. So the non-Michigan and Michigan State games are the hardest to pick for me.
Yeah, I think Nebraska is definitely in that like they could be one and done zone. Whether you know if Indiana somehow goes on a run and gets them, like the Hoosiers did outplay them for 3 quarters of that game at Assembly Hall. And then for Purdue, Joe, I just feel like if Purdue were to win and were to be sharp from the first minute against Nebraska, like they were in Lincoln in their first matchup.
Well, from what minute 1 to minute 32, then
Yes,
the
yeah, they
last
didn't
8 minutes, I don't know what the heck that
they
was.
didn't finish that one off very well, but they like that is the way that teams go on runs is they keep going on good starts and then they just hold on. And on another thing, Joe, is that Braden Smith is chasing the assist record. He probably needs 6 more games to get it. And like if you get to the Big Ten tournament championship game, that makes it a whole lot easier to get. And presumably, if you get that far, he's getting a lot of assists because he's playing well. So that is another angle there. I know Matt Painter and the Boilers haven't taken this tournament as seriously as they probably as some other teams have in the past, but I think that tone might be changing just a little bit here with some history on the line.
1000%. And also, Sean, I know there's this idea, and it's not really a myth, it's just a clear fact that this tournament doesn't matter too much for seeding. I'll put it to you this way: whether it matters for seeding or not, Purdue needs a little spark. They've not looked the same, since. I mean, hell, Sean, I mean this. Nebraska was like the one trailer of the continuing Purdue movie we saw from the beginning of the year to January. Ever since that West Coast road trip, Sean, Purdue has not looked the same to me.
Yeah, they had a nice win at Iowa, but yeah, they lost to teams above them at times significantly and at home. I think like 2 wins for them here could go a long way. They're still bound to get a pretty good seed in the tournament. I still have them on the 3 line, and I think it's pretty like I think there might be 1 or 2 teams behind them on the 3 line too. Like you can't take away their resume. We do have to remember that this team did go to Alabama and win. They did beat Texas Tech by 30 on a neutral. They did pick up some really great wins in this league. They Iowa on the road, Nebraska on the road. Like they beat a bunch of good teams. So hopefully for them, and not for my team, but hopefully for them, they can go on a little bit of a run here and get some of that mojo back. Now we go to the bottom, Joe, and potentially UCLA Michigan State rematch. Michigan State saw the Bruins probably at their lowest earlier this year. That was the Mick Cronin ejected in his own player game, but that really can be traced back like to their rock bottom, Joe. They have been pretty good since then, since they got back from that Michigan trip where they got trounced twice. The Bruins are still playing for seeding a little bit, I think. They are off the bubble. They are not going to be in the first 4 in Dayton. So maybe with the exception of Ohio State, they are still trending up going into this tournament.
I agree. And the one caveat shot, I was going to interrupt you, but I do have the floor now. The one team they lost to since then has been Minnesota. So, I'm going to be honest with you. Nico Medved, I know everyone sees the sub 500 record.
Yeah,
If they get past Rutgers, that's not going to be an easy game for the Bruins.
he has done like really an incredible job this year. He's gone through the better part of a month with 5.5 scholarship players.
Right.
And not that he had a ton to begin with either. They had a 7-man rotation in December when Indiana went there, and they had a couple of close games against some bye teams, and then they lost a few. They got blown out by Santa Clara. Turns out the Broncos are pretty good. I actually think Rutgers is going to get them here, Joe. I think that
Wow.
I think Rutgers is sneakily playing like a lot better than they have been all year. So I think Minnesota or UCLA might miss out on that rematch. But as much as I think like Wisconsin and Nebraska styles don't really like lend themselves to going on like a consistent run, I think UCLA's does. Like they don't rely on a ton of ridiculous offense. They've been guarding better recently. Now the team that also does that, they're going to have to play if they win their first game. So, the road could end there. But I think we could see the team that comes out of this bottom quarterfinal potentially going to the championship.
I agree, Sean. But one thing I'll say is I don't see any of the three teams beating Michigan State. I think, Michigan State, they did lose to Michigan, but the three like scorching hot teams in the conference outside of Michigan who won at 19-1. So that's just, we'll forget them. It's Ohio State, it's the Bruins, and it's Michigan State. Michigan State, that performance against Michigan, Sean, that beats every other team in this
Oh,
conference. I
for
think that's very
sure.
fair to say.
And I think it might beat Michigan on a neutral, too.
Totally.
And I think they're going to be like salivating for another chance, Joe, because I know that they not that they felt like they deserved to win that game, but they felt like they had a chance. And like if
Yeah.
if you can find yourself in another coin toss game, who knows? And I think Michigan State, they have been hit a little bit with the injury bug in terms of their depth, but they typically like this is the model of teams that I trust more in short prep back to back to back potential games here. Like once you've played 1 and 2 days in a row and you're at the end of the shot clock and you've got to do something, they're not going to let you do it, and you're going to have to make a tough shot at the end of the shot clock. And I think Donovan Dent might be one of the best options for that. But yeah, I think Michigan State will get to the championship game, and I think we'll see a round three between the Wolverines and the Spartans, and I think the Wolverines just get them again.
I actually disagree, Sean. I fully agree with your bottoms to the Michigan State part of the bracket. I think the Spartans beat the Bruins. I actually do agree that one of Purdue or Indiana, whoever that is, beats Nebraska. I think Michigan State makes light work of either Purdue or Indiana. MSU's in the title game. Then on the top half, so the earlier games should have went that first. I think
Yeah,
Michigan barely scrapes by in the 8-9 game. I mean that. I think Michigan wins that by single digits. That probably comes down to the wire. And then
it
Wisconsin
probably
beats
comes
Illinois
down
again.
to the fact that they didn't have to play the day before and the other team
Yep.
did.
Especially a team like Ohio State. Like if it's
Yeah,
Ohio State in a close game, I actually give the Buckeyes an even worse chance to win because of I trust Iowa's depth a lot more than the Buckeyes. But in terms of Saturday, Sean, between Wisconsin and Illinois, I think both of those teams could get Michigan again. It's like Wisconsin certainly already did it. Illinois, I think, had a putrid shooting night against Michigan. I thought on the boards they were completely outclassed. I doubt that happens again in front of a neutral crowd. I think it'll be a 50-50 for the first semifinal. But give me the Badgers to take on the Spartans in the championship game, and I actually think Wisconsin gets them again. I think Greg Gard finally gets over the hump. I think third time's the charm. He's lost, I believe, 2 years in a row in the final, one to Illinois and last year to Michigan. I think Greg Gard finally gets the proverbial monkey off his back in this Big Ten tournament, and they lift their first Big Ten tournament trophy, I believe, Sean, since 2015. So, yeah.
that would make sense. Yeah, I think they win it a couple of years before too in
No,
2013, 2012.
uh,
Did they lose in
they
the
won it.
championship?
No, they've Wisconsin's lost in the title game so many times in recent
Yeah.
memory.
Okay.
2013, they
Because I know
lost in
they got
2017.
Indiana in the
Yeah.
semis in 2013. I don't remember if they won the championship game or not. But yeah, I think it'll be a fun tournament actually, Joe. I think we might get sort of stuck in the mud in some of these other conferences once we get to Thursday and Friday, but we haven't seen a lot of these matchups more than once. Um, but yeah, I think I'll just finish my bracket here. I think Ohio State beats Iowa, Michigan beats Ohio State, USC or Washington beats USC, then Wisconsin, then Illinois. Or no, USC doesn't beat them all. Wisconsin beats them, and then Illinois beats Wisconsin. I think Indiana beats Northwestern. Purdue beats Indiana. Purdue beats Nebraska. Rutgers beats Minnesota. UCLA beats Rutgers. Michigan State beats UCLA. Michigan State beats Purdue. Michigan beats Illinois. Michigan beats Michigan State.
And
So,
Sean, it's funny. You have a chalky bracket on the back end. I have a chalky bracket on the front end. I think it's the semifinal round, particularly on the Michigan side, that's gonna raise some eyebrows. And by the way, if you do take the Wisconsin pick, they are plus 3,000 right now. So if you're a Badger fan or believe in my take, or even believe even stronger than I do in my take, that's a great value bet.
yeah, there's some good value out there, not just in this conference and in some other ones. And we do have to remember, Joe, that like I don't think you're going to be lugging Yaxel out there for 39 minutes. I think you're going to be trying to keep him around 34 to 35, and you know maybe Michigan hasn't looked the best when Amara's been off the floor defensively. Maybe you try a few more minutes with that, but especially the top, let's call it the top 6 or the top 5 plus Purdue. They're pretty set where they are. Don't know if they can go too far up or too far down. And then UCLA and Ohio State too are in that weird spot, Joe, where a loss might push them back to the 10 line, and you might actually want to be there instead of the 8-9 game because the 1 seeds are loaded this year. Um, but yeah, it should be a fun tournament. It'll get underway later today by the time this is released. And Joe, unless you got anything else to add, I think we'll wrap it up here.
Sounds good to me, Sean.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Please check out the other tournament preview videos if you haven't already, and we will be back pretty soon early on in this tournament to recap some of the early games. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.